Hi everybody, this is Carissa with Inky Fairy Designs, and welcome back to another video featuring Brutus Monroe products. So here are the products that we're going to be using today. First, I pulled out the Happy Rose stamp set. We're going to do some fun watercoloring with that using the Aqua Pigments. I pulled out coral, pink, yellow orange, yellow green, and then the dark gray black from the skin tone set. Also, of course, going to be stamping with the detail ink in Raven. Pulled out this glitter cardstock in, I think it's snow, glitter snow. And then the foundation dyes, the circle foundation dyes. So those are all the products I'll be using. I'm going to be doing some watercoloring today, and I pulled out my silver black velvet brushes, a round number 2, and then a half or a quarter-inch flat brush, I believe. So we're going to go ahead and jump into our project today. We're going to make that fun floral card for spring. And so I am stamping first on some cold press watercolor paper. So I pulled out my Misty so that I would be able to stamp it several times, and I'm just figuring out here where I wanted that stamp on my paper. I kind of thought that I would cut it down, or originally I thought I would fussy cut this out, and then of course I have to arrange it so that my stamp doesn't get caught in the little hinges. So here I am. I'm just going to ink it up with that Brutus Monroe Raven ink, and then I'm going to start stamping it. I stamped this stamp several times, 3 or 4 times really, to get a clear impression. So here is the first stamp, and you'll see when I lift up the door that we have the rose there, but it's not as dark as I wanted it. So I'm going to go in and stamp it again. The reason that it takes multiple stamping is when you're watercoloring on, when you're watercoloring and you're using watercolor paper, even the hot press has a bit of texture to it, but the cold press is very textured, and it is my favorite to watercolor on because I love the texture. I love that, it creates some depth to your projects when you're watercoloring, and I just love that texture. And so that's why I use it. So I think I end up stamping it one more time, and then we'll be ready to get into our coloring. Okay, so I have my inks, or my aqua pigments, on my glass mat. You can see I have just dropped a bit of them, and I'm using that as my palette. And now I'm going to start my watercoloring. So I kept the first little bit of it in real time so you can kind of see how the watercoloring takes and how I lay down the colors. So the first thing that I did was I laid down a little bit of clean water on this little petal. I'm taking the rose one petal at a time. And this is just because I want to get that kind of depth and dimension with the shading. And so I lay down that clean water, and then I put a little bit of that coral towards the inside of the rose where it would be darkest. And then I thought it would be fun. I love using yellow as like my highlight when I'm painting a rose. And so I pulled out that yellow, orange yellow, and I just put a little bit of it on the other side, the opposite side of where I put that red, to create that highlight, to create that depth, to create that fold in the petal where it's opening up. And so I'm just blending those two together now. I'm using my round number 2 brush for this rose. I really wanted a smaller brush, a more detailed brush. So now I am trying to figure out, okay, which rose do I want to skip to? Because when I am watercoloring a stamp, you I want to skip around. I don't want to paint something that's right next to what I just painted, because when you paint next to something that is wet with more wet medium, it's going to blend and bleed into each other, which we want sometimes, but when we want to get this detail, we don't want that to happen. And so I skip and make sure that there is a little bit of space in between the next thing that I color. So you can see how I'm skipping around the rows. I'm kind of going every other petal from the left side of the rose, starting there, all the way up to the right side or the top of the rose. So I'll just skip a few petals in between, but the concept is the same. The coloring is the same for each petal. I lay down some clean water, and then I add that red shade towards the center of the flower, whether that's on the left or the right side, depending on, you know, how we're coming from the center. And then I just drop in a bit of that yellow on the outside. So that gives me a really pretty blend and creates some really beautiful highlights and shadows. So I've gone all the way as far as I can go, and now I'm picking out a few of these lower petals and doing the exact same thing. So you can see that it is a little bit of a process, but it is so relaxing. I love watercoloring, and I pretty much love watercoloring with any medium. I don't really have a preference, brand, or, you know, I just love watercoloring. It is something that really kind of relaxes me, and I've had this stamp since I began my inspiration team term, and I really loved it, and I was really inspired by the packaging that it came in, and that is what inspired this card. I wanted to make a card based on the packaging. You can see in the upper left hand corner, it just has some beautiful watercolor roses and then some great stripes. So we're going to bring those in a little bit later once we're done coloring the rose. So now that you've seen the process in real time, let's speed that up so you're not sitting here all morning or afternoon and waiting for me to finish painting. So I'm just going to go in. I did dry this before I went in and did these other petals. So after I finished the petals that I could, spacing them out, I went ahead and dried that layer with my heat tool, and that is perfectly fine to do. Take your heat tool and dry your layers in between. It's also perfectly fine to set it aside and let it dry naturally. It's just up to you. It's personal preference. I like to keep going, and so I'll pull out my heat tool and dry those layers in between so that I can just keep right on going and making my card. So once I finished those layers, I went ahead and dried it again, and now I'm coming up top, or I'm coming over top what I just colored and adding a little bit more depth and dimension to those petals. So you can see I can glaze with the aqua pigments right on top and create some really beautiful shading and shadows underneath the petals. So when you're looking at a flower like this rose in particular, you know that the petals on top are going to be creating a shadow on the petals underneath. So wherever they overlap, that is just where I am going to add a little bit more of that red color. And it's very simple. It's as simple as that. I don't try to take it any further. I don't want to make it any more complicated because, like I said, coloring to me is just a fun thing to do. And I color something until I'm happy with it. I'm not coloring it to be realistic, and I'm not coloring it to be perfect. So it's just to make me happy, give me something to take my mind off of other things. That's why I make cards. That's why I stamp. That's why I watercolor. And so that's what it's all about. And then I get to make something pretty and mail it to a friend who then gets to have some joy in her or his life as well. So that's what it is. Don't stress over perfection or getting it just right. You have the stamp. You can stamp and color it many, many times, and each time will be a new fun experience. Okay, so we're done with the watercoloring. That was fun. And now I'm going to bring in the stripes that you can see on that packaging to the left. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I love the look of watercolor stripes. So I'm pulling out, I believe it's a 1/4 inch, might be a 1/2 inch, might be a 1/2 inch flat brush. This is the easiest way to make stripes, is just using your flat brush and placing it on your paper and pulling it across. Now when I get to the rose, of course you can see I use like the corner of the brush or the tip of the brush and kind of get those little areas, but I'm not being perfect. The look that I'm going after is imperfection. I don't want those stripes to be perfectly straight. I want them to be a little bit wonky, and I love that aqua pigment because it's got a bit of shimmer. So I went ahead and die cut this little circle from the foundation dies and stamped my sentiment. Now I'm just assembling it all together, putting it on a top folding A2 size card base using the Not Your Mama's cardstock. I cut a little strip of that glitter snow cardstock just for a little bit of interest on the right side. Put some foam adhesive behind the sentiment and place that on my card front. Now I'm just adding a little bit of highlights with a white gel pen, and I'll also go over the rose with a glitter pen just to give it a little bit more shimmer. I love the shimmer of the stripes. I wanted to, and the glitter strip on the other side, so I wanted to tie all of that together. And who doesn't love a beautiful shimmery, glittery rose? That pretty much wraps up the card today. I hope you enjoyed seeing that and maybe got a few tips on how to watercolor flowers in the future. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. And if you are inspired by this card or any card that you see here on the Brutus Monroe channel, please feel free to tag us and use the hashtag Brutus Monroe. If you're inspired by something that I created, I would love it if you tag me at Inky Fairy Designs so I could come around and see what you're creating and give you a little bit of love as well. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video very, very soon. Bye.